now I'm going to start with how your taxes and other income interact with the financial aid application process. So the first thing you have to know is basically whose tax and income information are we going to need for your financial aid application. And that depends upon whether you are a dependent or independent student. So if you're independent, you are age 24, or it may be the year that you're turning 24. On the FAFSA, it asks you, were you born before a certain date? And if you say yes, then you're considered independent on the FAFSA. It will ask if you're married as of the day you're filing the FAFSA. So that's not in the future, okay? And it's as of the day you're filing the FAFSA, are you married? If it's yes, then you can answer yes on the FAFSA. It asks if you're in a master's or doctorate program, if you're active duty military or a veteran, if you're an emancipated minor. That is a status that's granted by a court. So if you're an emancipated minor, it doesn't mean that you moved out of your parents' house. It does not mean that. It means that you were granted that status by a judge. You have a court document that says that you're an emancipated minor. That's what it means. Some people mark that one in error. Or after age 13, you are a ward of the court in foster care or both parents are deceased. If you are providing more than 50% of financial support for your child or your legal dependent. So it's not just you give some money to somebody, but you're actually supporting more than half of that person's livelihood. And if you're homeless or at risk of being homeless and not in the custody of a parent, and of course, additional documentation may be required by the financial aid office to verify that. And another thing, filing your own tax return does not make you an independent student for the FAFSA or CADA applications. So even if you file your own tax return, even if you're earning your own money, that is not sufficient to make you independent. You have to fall under one of these categories here. So based on that, now you know if you're dependent or independent. So whose tax and income information is required is going to be part of your FAFSA or CADA application process. If you're an independent student, it's you and your spouse. If you are married at the time that you file the FAFSA. If you get married later, okay, then you're actually going to be treated single for that year. If you filed your FAFSA before you got married, then you're going to be single for that whole academic year. And then the next time you file, you'll be considered married. If you're a dependent student with an unmarried or a separated parent, so your parents either not married or they're divorced or they are separated, okay? Then it's you plus that one parent. That's whose information goes on the FAFSA. So if parents are unmarried, or if they're separated and they do not live together in the same home. That's important. So it's, and which parent, let's say your parents are separated or they're not together or they're not married. It's the parent you lived with the most in the last 12 months prior to filing your FAFSA or CADA application. And then if you're in the third situation, if you're a dependent student whose parents are either married or live together in the same household, then it's you and parent number one and parent number two. So in this case, now, when it comes to step parents are parents for FAFSA purposes if they are legally married to your parent. If they are legally married to your parent and they're not separated, right? They're in the same household with you, then you must report the step parent's income. But a parent's unmarried partner who is not the student's parent, that person's income should not be reported on the FAFSA. So your parent's boyfriend or girlfriend, that person's income should not be reported anywhere on the FAFSA. Unless they're legally married to your parent, in which case they are a step parent legally, and then their information does go on the FAFSA or CADA. Sorry, sometimes I say FAFSA, but I mean FAFSA or CADA application, either one. So let's talk a little bit about marital status, because marital status is defined a little differently on your financial aid application than it is for tax purposes or other legal purposes. Okay, so for the student, you have a few marital statuses to choose from. Single means you've never been married before. Then you have married or remarried. So either you're married or you were married and then you weren't married and then now you're married again, you're remarried. You're separated or you're divorced or widowed. So these are the options that the student has to report their marital status. Now for FAFSA purposes, and I say for FAFSA and CADA purposes only, this doesn't apply to taxes or other legal purposes, but for your financial aid application, married couples are considered separated if they are legally married, but they've chosen to live separate lives and they live in separate households as though they were not married. So this is a very different definition than you'll find for other purposes. This is just specific to your financial aid application. And then we have for parents. So for parents of dependent students, same thing, either they're never married, they're married or remarried, they are divorced or separated or widowed, or here's a tricky one, unmarried and both legal parents living together. Now, this one gets tricky because sometimes you have both of your parents living in the household, and while it may be true that they've never been married, you don't use the one that says never married, because if they live together in one household, then you use the status that says unmarried and both legal parents living together. Okay, so if your two parents live together, but they're not married, that's the one you use, unmarried and living together. The marital status determines whether one or both parents have to report their tax and income information on your financial aid application, and the marital status determines whether a correct tax filing status was used. So sometimes we have to collect tax documents from the student and their parents, and so it's very important that you report their marital status correctly on the FAFSA or CADA, because then that lets us know what's going on with the taxes and whose tax forms we need. Another thing that another way that financial aid and tax information coincide or interact together is through the IRS data retrieval tool. So only the FAFSA application has the IDRT IRS data retrieval tool option. And the person must have a social security number in order to use this tool. As of now, there's no way to use the retrieval tool within ITIN, but right now it's only within the FAFSA, and they must have a social security number to use this tool. And if you can use the tool, it's really great because this allows you to link the IRS information directly into your FAFSA and import all that tax info that's required straight into your application. It puts it in there, it's correct. You don't have to worry about entering it manually or whether you made a mistake. It's going to pull it in. When it does, then we know that that is correct information, because on the FAFSA it will say that this information was imported from the IRS. So then we don't have to check on that. It helps you avoid common errors. You don't need to provide a paper copy of your tax return later if the financial aid office needs the tax information. We already have it. It's on the FAFSA through the IDRT, but certain people cannot use this tool. So if you're married, but you filed a separate tax return, you won't be able to use the tool. Or if you're now unmarried, but you previously filed a joint tax return, you also won't be able to use this tool. And the reason is because then it's not going to pull in the correct parent information, right? It's either going to pull in two incomes when it should be one, or it's only going to pull in one income when really you have to report two. And then there is a verification process. So this is another place where taxes and financial aid interact. Some students are going to be required to verify the information that's submitted on the FAFSA or CADA. So one question we get is, okay, I already submitted all that information. Why am I being asked for it again? When you enter it on the application, it's not really being checked by anybody to see what's correct or how many members in your household. It's just asking you to report it. So the federal government, state government, they ask schools to verify some of that information. And that's why we have to sometimes ask you for copies of tax returns, W-2s, other income information, who's in your household, report who they are. So We have household members. That's another thing that gets verified. How many of those household members are in college? Just a word on household. If you are an independent student, your household is you and your spouse and your children. If you are a dependent student, your household is your FAFSA or CATA parent or parents. It's yourself and it's your siblings, your siblings who are also dependent on the same parent. So keep in mind, if you're an independent student, so you're 24 or older, or you're married or something, one of the other things, then you're not just reporting everybody who lives in your house. You're only reporting the people that you support, who are part of your household. So it's you, your spouse, your kids, right? If you're dependent, then it's you and your parents and your siblings. That's who's the household, and other people that your parents support. So if we ask for a copy of the federal tax return transcript, or you've downloaded it into the FAFSA, the school have to verify that the person has used a correct tax filing status. And unmarried persons cannot use a married tax filing status. In the state of California, you can't just file as a married couple just because you have lived together a long time. We don't have that here. So you have to actually be legally married if you're going to use a married tax filing status. And also, married persons cannot use single or head of household in most cases. With head of household, about like 99% of married people cannot use head of household, especially if they live with their spouse. So if an incorrect tax filing status was used, then we will request the student to submit an amended tax return, a copy of an amended tax return. Also, this is the information that's being either imported on the IRS data retrieval tool, or it's being asked for in terms of paper copies of these documents. We're looking at the tax filing status, the adjusted gross income, the income tax paid, wages, earnings from business or work, untaxed interest, tax pensions and annuity, IRA deductions, education credits. Those count in your favor, so you definitely want to report them. And then W-2 forms. We're looking at the wages, and we're also looking at boxes 12A through 12D with certain codes, because that indicates untaxed income that we have to look at if we collect the document from you. Also, work study and taxable grants and scholarships. So if you have claimed some kind of education credit, if you have earned work study, if you have received grants and scholarships, there are questions on the FAFSA that ask about each of these things, and you just want to make sure to report it wherever it goes. Taxable college grant and scholarship aid reported to the IRS as income. One of the questions on the FAFSA and CATA asks if you have this, right? But the key here is you're only reporting it there if you actually reported it to the IRS as income. So if it's not reported on your tax return, if you got grants and you did not report that as income on your tax return to the IRS, then you report 0 on the FAFSA or CATA. So it's only asking basically were some of the income shown on your tax return, was some of that grant money that you reported as income, right? And so if it wasn't, then you just want to put 0. Taxable earnings from federal work study. That question on the FAFSA or CATA is going to require you to look back at your financial aid awards for the last 2 years. And for example, you're going to look at spring 2019 and fall 2019 to see, did I earn federal work study funds during that tax year, right? Because a calendar year falls over 2 different academic years. So you're going to look at the tax year. You're going to be looking at 2 different semesters, and then you can fill out that section in the FAFSA or CATA. You're going to need to look back at your financial aid award.